Ever get that feeling like you're carrying around old hurts from childhood?
Hmm.
Like a younger you is kind of stuck back there, still hurting.
Hmm.
Well, today we're going to dive deep into that, into the idea of the wounded inner child.
Hmm.
We've got John Bradshaw as our guide, and believe me, he's got some powerful insights about healing from childhood trauma, and that feeling of toxic shame that can really linger.
Oh, absolutely.
And the cool thing is, we're going to bring it all to life through real stories, real people who've used these ideas to heal and transform their lives. We're lucky enough to have an expert joining us today, a psychoanalyst who actually uses Bradshaw's methods in their practice. So, welcome.
It's great to be here. Bradshaw's work, it really did change the way we think about those early experiences
Hmm.
and how much they shape us. It's powerful stuff.
Totally. So, to jump right in, Bradshaw's big idea is this. We all have this wounded inner child inside us. It's that part of us that's still carrying the pain, the unmet needs from our childhood. And until we actually deal with that hurt, it can really get in the way of, having good relationships, accepting ourselves, all that good stuff.
Exactly. And a huge part of healing is understanding the difference between, well, healthy shame, the kind we all feel sometimes, and what Bradshaw calls toxic shame.
Okay, I'm curious, what's the difference?
Well, we all feel shame, right? It's how we learn, how we grow. But toxic shame, that's a different beast. That's the voice inside that tells you you're inherently flawed, that you're unworthy of love, like bad to your core.
Wow. Okay, yeah, that's a big difference. And it makes sense that kind of shame, it would stick with you.
It does. And it often underlies so many of the challenges people face later in life. Relationships, careers, you name it.
So, how about we put this into perspective? Let's talk about Evan. He's 35, and he really struggles with feeling worthy of love. Building healthy connections is tough for him. He always seems to push people away.
Yeah, Evan's story is a classic example of how those early experiences really get woven into the fabric of that wounded inner child.
So, what happened?
Well, Evan's father was very emotionally distant, very critical. So Evan grew up feeling small, insignificant.
So, those feelings of worthlessness, they just kind of followed him into adulthood.
Exactly. They can lead to self-sabotage in relationships, a fear of intimacy. It wasn't until Evan really started to explore his childhood, those early wounds, that he had his aha moment.
That's so huge. It's like those patterns from childhood were running the show without him even realizing it.
All too common, actually. But once you start connecting those dots between the past and the present, that's when real transformation can begin.
So, what changed for Evan?
For Evan, it was understanding where that shame came from. That allowed him to start to separate his adult self from that wounded little boy inside. He could finally offer that child the compassion, the understanding he never received.
It's like he internalized all that negativity and it became his own worst critic.
You got it. But Maria's story, it's not just about the struggle. It's also a testament to what's possible when we address this kind of shame.
So, how did things turn around for her?
Through therapy, she started to challenge those really deep-seated beliefs. She began cultivating self-compassion.
You mean like actually being kind to herself?
Exactly. Can you imagine finally releasing yourself from that pressure, that constant need to be perfect?
Wow, what a relief that would be. It's really encouraging to hear that Maria was able to shift her perspective like that. It makes me wonder, what are some concrete things people can do to start healing those old wounds?
That's a great question. At the heart of Bradshaw's work is this idea of reclaiming your wounded inner child.
Okay, so what does that actually look like in practice?
Well, think of it as becoming the loving parent that little one always needed.
I like that.
You can start by just visualizing that younger you and offering them the love, the safety, the emotional support that maybe they were missing.
So it's more than just acknowledging the hurt. It's about actively nurturing that inner child.
Exactly. It's often called reparenting, and it can involve things like, journaling, where you write to and from your inner child, or visualization exercises where you're offering comfort and reassurance.
It's like rewriting the narrative of your childhood, filling in those gaps with love and acceptance.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And Bradshaw, he really believed that's where the magic happens.
Hmm.
When you start meeting those unmet needs from childhood, you build a stronger foundation for a healthier sense of self.
So it's like those needs, they don't just disappear, they kind of stay with us.
They do.
And we can actually go back and address them.
We can.
Ah.
Let me tell you about Jacob. He's 42, and he grew up with a lot of emotional neglect.
Oh, wow.
His parents, they were so caught up in their own stuff, they weren't really emotionally available for him.
I can only imagine how that would lead to feeling unworthy, like you're not deserving of attention or care.
Absolutely. As an adult, Jacob became very self-reliant, emotionally shut down.
That makes sense, like a defense mechanism.
Exactly. It's a common coping mechanism for people who didn't have their emotional needs met as children. They learned to suppress those needs just to survive.
It's heartbreaking to think of that little kid just trying to cope.
It is. But here's the inspiring part. When Jacob learned about reparenting his inner child, it was a game changer for him.
Oh, really?
He started practicing self-compassion, visualizing his younger self,
Yeah.
offering words of comfort, reassurance.
So he was giving himself what he didn't get as a child.
Exactly. And it was so powerful for him to finally receive that validation he'd craved for so long.
It really highlights how these early experiences, they can have such a lasting impact. It's like those unmet needs, they become these invisible forces shaping our lives.
You said it. Bradshaw's work is all about bringing those invisible forces to light. He talks about the false self, which is basically this mask we develop to protect ourselves from more shame, more rejection.
Oh, interesting. So instead of being our true selves, we're trying to be who we think other people want us to be.
Exactly. We hide our true feelings, our desires, just to fit in, to avoid criticism. It's like wearing a costume to please others.
And I'm guessing that takes a toll.
It does. It might feel safe at first, but underneath, your true self is waiting to break free.
It makes you wonder how many people are walking around wearing these masks feeling like they can't be their authentic selves.
More than you'd think.
And that false self, it might help us survive at the time, but later on, it can get in the way of real connection, right?
100%. It prevents us from experiencing true intimacy, real joy, because we're not being ourselves. We see this with Tina. She's 30, and she spent most of her life as a people pleaser, always putting everyone else's needs ahead of her own, pushing down her feelings to avoid conflict.
Oh, I know that feeling. Always saying yes when what you really want to say is no.
Yeah,
It's exhausting.
it is. And for Tina, this pattern, it started in her childhood. She grew up believing her parents' love was conditional, all about being the good girl. So she learned to silence her own voice to avoid disapproval.
It's heartbreaking. Like she's stuck in this performance, never really feeling free to be herself.
It's a common struggle. But the good news is, this pattern, it can be broken.
So how did Tina start to break free?
For Tina, the key was realizing that while her false self felt comfortable, it was keeping her from really living.
Living authentically.
Yes. Through therapy, she began to identify her true feelings, her desires, separate from what she thought others wanted from her.
It's like she was finally giving herself permission to take off that mask and say, this is me, take it or leave it.
Exactly. And that's where real freedom lies, in embracing our authentic selves, even the messy parts, the imperfect parts, realizing that our worth doesn't depend on other people's approval.
I love that. Now, let's talk about one of Bradshaw's most powerful techniques for healing the wounded inner child dialogue. Now, I know that might sound a little out there to some people, but bear with us because it's really profound.
It might sound a little strange at first, yeah. But essentially, it's about creating a bridge between your adult self and that wounded part of you that's still carrying those past hurts.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How does that actually work?
Through visualization, through imagination, you can actually connect with your inner child and have a conversation.
Wait, so we're talking about literally having a conversation with that younger version of yourself.
Exactly.
Like, what would you say?
Whatever feels right. You might offer words of comfort, validate their feelings, just listen with love and understanding. It's amazing what can happen when you tap into that space.
So it's about giving that younger you what they might not have received back then.
Precisely.
What kind of impact does that have?
Well, often repressed emotions like grief, anger, fear, they can finally be expressed and released. Many people find it incredibly cathartic.
That makes sense. It's like you're giving a voice to those feelings that have been bottled up for years.
It's powerful stuff.
Do you have any examples of how this has helped someone?
Absolutely. We have Lily, she's 25, and she really struggled to express her emotions. She would shut down, dissociate, whenever difficult feelings came up.
I can relate to that. It's like those feelings are just too overwhelming to deal with.
They can be. But Lily's story is a beautiful example of how this technique can help.
So what happened?
Well, through inner child dialogue, Lily was able to access and express the grief and anger she'd been holding on to for years.
Wow.
It was as if she was finally giving that little girl who had felt so alone, so unheard, a voice.
That must have been incredibly healing for her.
It was. And you know what's amazing is that it not only allows for the release of those pent-up emotions, but it also fosters a much deeper sense of self-compassion, of integration.
Integration.
Yes,
Yeah.
you begin to see those wounded parts of yourself not as something to be ashamed of, but as a part of your journey.
It's like you're moving toward wholeness, embracing all parts of yourself. Which brings us to Bradshaw's final stage of healing, right?
Right.
Integration.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that integration isn't about erasing the past or pretending those wounds never happened. It's about bringing that healed inner child into the present, allowing them to exist alongside your adult self.
So it's more about making peace with those parts of ourselves than trying to cut them off or ignore them.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that all those experiences, the good and the bad, they've shaped who you are. You wouldn't be you asterisk, without every part of your story.
I like that. It makes those past experiences feel less like, well, baggage and more like stepping stones.
That's a great way to think about it. And we see this with David. He's 38, and he spent years trying to keep his inner child at a distance.
Really?
Yeah, he'd compartmentalize his emotions, avoid anything that brought up those old feelings of hurt, rejection, you name it.
Sounds like he was trying to protect himself from more pain.
Exactly. But what David realized through therapy was, by pushing away those painful childhood experiences, he was also kind of disconnecting from a vital part of himself.
Interesting.
It was through embracing his inner child's pain, seeing it as part of his story, not something to be ashamed of, that he began to heal.
So instead of judging that part of himself, he started to offer it compassion.
Exactly. And as he integrated those experiences, he realized that his vulnerability, his capacity for deep feeling, it wasn't a weakness, it was a strength, a source of authenticity.
Wow. That's powerful. It's like those past wounds, once they're healed, they can actually become sources of strength.
That's the beauty of Bradshaw's work, you know?
Yeah.
It gives you a roadmap, not just to heal the wounds of the
Right.
past, but to embrace your true self. All your complexities, all your imperfections, all of it.
We've covered so much ground today. We talked about understanding that wounded inner child, the impact of toxic shame. We even got into practical tools like reparenting and inner child dialogue.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. But if you had to choose one thing, what would you say is the most important takeaway from Bradshaw's work?
You know, for me, it all comes back to self-compassion.
That's huge.
It is recognizing that we all asterisk, have these wounded parts, and that's okay. Offering ourselves the same kindness, the same understanding we'd offer a loved one who's struggling.
Be our own best friend.
Exactly. And when we can do that, when we can extend that compassion inward, that's when we open ourselves up to a whole new level of healing, of growth, of really being who we are.
We become free to live life on our own terms, not defined by the pain of the past.
Right? We get to write our own stories.
This has been such an insightful conversation. Thank you so much for being here.
It's been my pleasure.
And to everyone listening, I hope you feel inspired to connect with your own inner child, to embark on your own journey of healing.
Healing is possible. You are worthy of love, of acceptance, of wholeness. Don't forget that.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we'll leave you with this. If you could go back and tell your inner child one thing, what would it be? Until next time, keep diving deep.